Hi, this is James Garden, CineTechGeek, and I'm at NAB2019, and I want to discuss some of the changes which are happening this year. One of the very boring but important parts of being in post and being in production is selecting the right codec for your production workflow. This has never been more important than it is now because of high dynamic range coming along the line. Now, I was at for example, a birds of a feather discussion with a lot of colorists last night, and there was very commonly talked about how a lot of these colorists are banging out content for producers, and the producers are pretty much saying, I just want to get it done as quickly and as effectively as possible, and not really taking into account the effects of the codec they select at the start. You know, currently they just want to go to a 709 sort of finish, but down the track in a few years they might want to go back and do a high dynamic range version. But if they didn't use the right codec at the start and the right workflow at the beginning to save a few little dollars at the start, they may be left out in the cold when it comes to wanting to repurpose and remonetize their content down the road. Now, I want to talk about this today because there are some certain things happening in the codec world, and I wanted to point out, because I'm on the Blackmagic stand, is in terms of acquisition codecs, Blackmagic RAW is a very important development. Now, I'll be honest, I've worked at I've been in SMPTE and helped out with some of the formations of codecs such as the VC5 codec, a very good codec. Unfortunately, it's kind of died on the vine because there are still some patent issues that some larger companies are refusing to sort of let go, and not allowing those codecs to actually be taken full advantage of via the community. Now, Blackmagic obviously has come out and tried to rectify this with their own codec that achieves these sort of advantages and more with their Blackmagic RAW. They've stated to me that the codec is available to other vendors if they choose to adopt it. Now, that would be really good. The main advantage of the Blackmagic RAW codec is that it allows you to do a RAW workflow and the quality of RAW, but takes away the heavy lifting that goes with a Bayard type codec. And so you can basically do, like, for example, very common, a lot of people are adopting ProRes RAW, but to edit that you'd really need a pretty hefty machine to deal with the debayering. So editing that on a laptop is probably out of the question. But editing Blackmagic RAW, which is as good if not better than ProRes RAW on a laptop, is very possible. So those sort of developments are coming down the line, and I'd like to encourage the community to think about what they do earlier on, because it takes a big effect on what happens later. An example of this would be if you're going to buy a car, and you go to a big car yard, with thousands of cars, and you walk in and say, I want to buy a car. I'm not sure what I want yet, but I'm going to go out there and look for the car that suits me. And they go to you first, okay, before you can go out there and select your car, you have to select the type of wheels you're going to put on the car first. Obviously, if you pick big chunky wheels that's on an SUV, well, you've already sort of dictated what's going to happen at the end, because if you try and put chunky SUV wheels on a sports car, it kind of doesn't work out properly and doesn't look right. And that's the sort of decision you're making when you pick your codec without figuring out where you're going afterwards. I'm just being recorded by someone else. So I really want people to take note and be aware of the codec they're selecting, the advantages and disadvantages of doing it, and also I'd like to encourage, I'm very happy with Grant making the Blackmagic RAW codec available, but I would lastly like to say that a big factor in codecs and what we're using is the archival aspect of the codec. You hear a lot of old timers talk about how we have digital Betacams or SR tapes, etc., and that's your archive. But an SR deck, they're going to be outdated and disappear eventually. So that tape, well, how will you read it if no tape drives or tape decks exist anymore? The big difference between, the thing that falls down to me when a lot of the older people talk about archiving is that being in a codec like that, what happens when the machines go away? But they don't really understand that an open source codec isn't based on the hardware that uses it, it's based on the software behind it. And so if a codec is in a SMPTE standard and there's open, there's there'd be open versions of that coder and decoder. The source code to it is available. When you're archiving that film and those source materials, and you want to get back to exactly that source material the way it was on the day that it was created, you can actually archive the source code to the codec with the media. And that completely guarantees that that media will be able to be read from now and to any time in the future, because ones and zeros never change. Ones and zeros are the same today as they will be millions of years from now. So I really encourage the adoption of codecs based on these understandings, because it opens the door for long-term storage, and much less, if you're the owner of the content, accessing that older content and avoiding any potential patent or legal issues down the road if you pick the right codec today. Anyway, that's James Garden, CineTechGeek. Bye for now.